Boker Tov. Today's Daf Yomi is Bava Kamma Daf Mem, Bava Kamma 40. And today's Daf Yomi, we're going to start on Mem Amid Aleph, 11 lines from the top, where the Gemara says Abraisa Tanarabanan Apotropis. That means a person who are the guardians over in this context, the guardians over the estate of a minor whose ox scored Mishalman Min Aliyah. They have to pay the damages of the muad from the best property of the estate, or the best property. Tomorrow, in yesterday's daf, had a dispute: does it come from the aliyah of the yesomim or the aliyah of the apotropos? Is it from the money from the orphans or from the guardian? The aim mishalman kofer, but they don't pay the ransom penalty. Now, what is kofar? So the Torah tells us that if an ox scores a person, and kills him, that the owner of the ox has to pay kofar, or ransom. And you'll see on today's daf that the Gemara has a dispute. Does the ransom penalty, is it calculated on the basis of the value of the person who was killed, or on the value of the person who owned the ox and did the killing? So we say that in this case, if it's, hold on. We say in this case that he doesn't pay the ransom penalty, since even though because he doesn't own the ox. So the Gemara says, Mantana, who is the one who says kufra kapara? So the Gemara assumes that the Brisa is assuming that the ransom penalty is paid as an atonement for the person whose ox did the killing. And so therefore, the orphans are not going to be considered b'nei kapara. And so therefore, since the orphans are not b'nei kapara, the orphans don't need an atonement, so therefore they don't bring this ransom penalty. So who is the author of our brisa? So Amar Rav Chisda must be that the author is Rabbi Shmuel ben Nosh or Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka. It must be the author must be Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, the Tanya v'Nosam Pidyon Navsho. Says you have to give the redemption of his soul. You have to pay the ransom, which means the Bein Nizak. According to the Tanna Kamma, means you pay the value of the Nizak. That's restitution. You're making good to the family. Whereas Rabbi Shmuel ben Nosh or Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka says, mazik. No, you pay the value of the mazik, so that you pay the value of the one who killed, which presumably at first glance would be that it is, because it's an atonement. So my love, okay. So what is the dispute here between the Tanna Kamma and Shmuel ben Yochanan ben Broka? Isn't it the Rabbanan Safri, that the Rabbanan who say then it's the value of the nizak? They say kufra mamona, who it's restitution, this kufra penalty. He says that the ransom is an atonement, and so therefore, if in the state of the orphans, they wouldn't pay anything. Says Rav Papa, no, kufra kapara. Even the Rabbanan who say it's the domain nizak, they would also say that the kufra is an atonement. What's the machokas here? Rabbanan safri b'denizak shaminan. Why does the Rabbanan say you value from the Nizak, and why does Rabbi Shmuel say you value the Mazik? My time of the Rabbanan. What's the reason why the Rabbanan say you value the Nizak? Because it says the verb she solamato, and with respect to the ransom penalty, it used the verb shisa. In kofar you shas alav, and also it says the word v'nemer shisa amala. It says the word shisa above with respect to a person, Rahman al-Atzlan, who strikes a fetus and kills the fetus. Just like above, we're looking at the value of the fetus, which is the nizak. So we basically, the Tanna Kamma, Rabbi Yochanan Broka, the Tanna Kamma is saying it's on the basis of the verse. Whereas Rabbi Shmuel ben Nosh, Rabbi Yochanan Savar, B'nasam Pidyon Navsho Ksiv. He says, no, it's on the basis of the fact it says it needs to give. He should give a redemption of his soul. And so therefore, since he's giving the redemption of his soul, that means the mazik. Rabbanan, the Rabbanan would say in. Yes, Pijon Navshoksiv, Miu Kishamina, B'Denizak Shemina. They say, yeah, Enochanami. It is a redemption for a soul. It is a kapara, but when we evaluate the value of the nizak, not the mazik. Gemara tells us an interesting story. Meshabachle Rava or Rav Nachman with Rav Acha bar Yaakov. Rava was praising to Rav Nachman. He was praising Rav Acha bar Yaakov, the Adam Gadolhu. He said he's a great man. So Rav Nachman said, when he comes to you, bring him to me, so I can meet him. When he had the opportunity, when Rav Acha bar Yaakov finally met Rav Nachman, Milsa. He says, ask me a question. Not clear who asked who, but most commentaries assume that Rav Nachman said to Rav Acha bar Yaakov, come ask me a question. Milsa. So Rav Acha bar Yaakov asked him the following question. Shor shal shnei shutfin. Let's say you have two partners who own this ox, Kates and Mishalman. Kates and Mishalman Kofer. How do they pay this ransom penalty if two people own this ox? Do we say Mishalman high kofer v'high kofer? Do we say that each one pays a ransom penalty? But can't be, because kofer echad. The Torah says you pay one ransom and not two. Would you say high chatzi kofer v'high chatzi kofer, where each one pays a half of ransom? Can't be. Kofer shalom amrachman avol chatzi kofer. Torah says to pay a full ransom and not a half. Adiyasa become ayin. So in the meantime, they're looking at this, sitting there and analyzing this question. Adiyasa become ayin. But in the meantime, presumably Rav Nachman was sitting there looking at this question. In the meantime, Rav Acha bar Yaakov asked him another question. It says, Amoy Tanan, we went to the Mishnah in Erchin, Chayve Erchin. The person takes a vow. He says, Erech alai. I have to give my value to the temple. The Mashkinin Osan. So therefore, the treasurer of the temple comes along and takes a pledge until he pays it. But let's say the person has a sin offering or a guilt offering, then we're going to say Ema Mashkin Osan. We don't take a pledge. Rashi says the distinction is that if it's an erchen, if donates his value, that's not for an atonement. And so therefore the person will give it later. But if it is a sin offering, guilt offering, we don't have to take a pledge because the person will rush to do it in order to get the atonement. So the question that was put, presumably to Rav Nachman, is what do we do with the case of somebody who has to pay the ransom? Do we say, given the kaparo, since he has to pay the ransom, so therefore it's like the sin offering, since it's an atonement, so therefore it's like the chatas and the asham. And so therefore, mechamer chamir alive will be mashkune. He's going to be very strict, and therefore you don't need to take a pledge. Or maybe because since he needs to give it to his friend, since the money is going to the family, therefore, given the chavre who to buy miasvole memonahu will grow. So therefore, under those circumstances, he's going to say, given the chavre who to buy miasvole, since he needs to give the money to his friend, therefore, memonahu will grow. Or some take out the verse of memona. It's not going to the temple. And so therefore, he's going to be delayed paying it. Buy mashkune. And they come take a pledge. Or inamir, alternatively, given to who will chata, since he didn't actually do the sin, it's only his money that did the damage. Well, chamar milse alai. He's not going to view it as strict. Ubai mashkune. And so therefore, we need to take a pledge. So Rav Nachman says, Shavkan, is stagger become Isa? Leave me alone. I'm still dealing with the first question. Why stop bothering me? I still haven't answered the first question. Gemara leaves both questions unresolved. It's an interesting case here. He said, I want to meet him. And then he says, ask me something. And he couldn't answer either one. Then Rabbanan, now the Gemara has the following case. Shalu b'cheskas tam. Let's say you borrowed the animal under the assumption that it was not a muad, but it was a tam. V'nimtza muad. And then afterwards you discover that it's a muad. Ba'alam b'shalman chatzi nezek. And under those circumstances, So the owners pay half damages. So let's say they borrow under the assumption that's a tam. Then you discover it's a muad. The owners pay half damages. Vishol mashayim chatzin nezik, and the borrower pays the other half. Whoever pays shol. Let's say the animal became a muad in the house of the borrower, zero balam, and then you returned it to the owners. Balam mashayim chatzin nezik. The owners pay the half damages. Vishol pater mikum, and the borrower is exempt. And Gemara is going to analyze this. Amar Mar. So let's look at the first case. Shol b'chaskas time. We borrow it as a tam. V'nimtza muad. And then you discover it's a muad. Balam mashayim chatzin nezik. Vishol chatzin nezik. The borrower pays half damages because he borrowed it, thinking it was a tam, and it did damage, and the owner pays the other half. Why does he have to pay anything? Says the Gemara. Why doesn't the borrower say to him, I didn't realize I was borrowing an ox that's in muad. Tura shi'ilei, Aryeh lo shi'ilei. Why doesn't he say to him, I thought I was borrowing an ox. I didn't think I was borrowing a lion. I didn't realize I was borrowing such a dangerous creature. Amarav, no. Hachamai skinan. No, he knew when he borrowed this animal that it had a tendency or looked like it was about to gore, even if it didn't gore. Gemara says, so why doesn't he say to him, listen, I borrowed a tam, I didn't borrow the muad. So there basically he could still have responded in this manner. He could have said, I intended to borrow a tam and not a muad, and so therefore, since it was a muad, I never accepted upon myself, and I shouldn't be responsible. Gemara says, no, if it really was a tam, you would have. If it was a tam, you still would have had to pay half damages. So here too, you also have to pay the half damages. Gemara says, well, why doesn't he say? If it would have been a tam, I would have been able to pay from the goof of the animal. And so why should I have to pay from my assets? Mishum Damroy, so you would have had to pay me back for an ox. So therefore, pay me back my ox. So the Gemara says, why he also could have said, Im Tamu, on top of Memama Bays, Modino Maftarina. If he said, if it really was a tam, I could have admitted it because it's a kanas. His half damages are a kanas, and I could have admitted it. I feel even according to the one who says the half damages are money, and I couldn't have admitted it and then got out of paying. Name away, you could have said, if it's a time, I would have sent it off into the swamp, and then I wouldn't have had to pay. And so we were talking about it's going to Aktam Beidina Vitavse. The court seized the ox. Well, if that's the case, why do the owners? The Bryce is talking about a case where the court seized the ox from the borrower. Why do the owners have to pay the half damages? Name away. Why doesn't the borrower say? Why doesn't the lender say to the borrower? It's fasto Torah biyada mandalo matzino eshtuyedina ba'adei. So he said, I put the ox in your hand, and now I can't go take anybody to court. How am I supposed to take the Bezdin to court to press my claim? You messed up. You put my ox in the case of an entity that's judgment proof. No, because the borrower could say back to him, Mishum darta nilech, if I would have returned it to you, they would have taken it straight from you. But the lender could say, if you sent it to me, I could have sent it off to the swamp. Yeah, but what's the difference? They would have gone to all your assets and claimed it because it was a muad. That's only if he has other assets. But let's say he has no other assets. What could the borrower have claimed? He could have said, he said, no, the reason why I returned it to the court was just like I owed you the money. I owed you the ox. But you owed them, and you owed the court. And so therefore, from the principle of Rabbi Nassan, one person owes his friend 100, and A owes B 100, and B owes C 100. That you can take it straight from A and give it to C. Give it to the one to whom it is guilty. So so then what's the next case of the Brisa, which says who would be shol v'chsiru balam mishalman chatzin. Let's say became a mood in the house of the borrower and he returned it to the owner pays the half damages. Vishol pater mikum. But the borrower is exempt from having to pay anything. So what's the reasoning? Seifa reshus mashana, reisha reshus ena mashana. In the last clause of the brisa, where it became a muad in the house of the borrower, and then he returned it, and then we say the borrower, the owner only has to pay half damages, because in that case we said since it changed its jurisdiction, it's going to change its status. But in the reisha, where he lent it as a muad, and the guy thought it was a tam, it remained its status as a muad. So therefore, the concluding clause, when you change jurisdiction, you change the status of the animal. But in the reisha, but in the preceding clause, in the first clause, reshus eina mashana. I'm Rabbi Yochanan Tavrei. There's no way to reconcile the two parts of the brisa. Misha shanazu lo shanazu. The one who taught this didn't teach this. Rabbah says, Amar midareisha reshus eina mashana, seifa nami reshus eina mashana. So Rabbah says no. From the fact that the first clause, Rabbah says we have to explain it as follows. Rabbah, from the fact in the first clause, it doesn't change its status if it changes jurisdiction. Also in the concluding clause, we'll have to say that it doesn't change its status when it changes jurisdiction. But what's the reason in the concluding clause it doesn't change? Mishum de Amar Le, what's the reason why in the concluding clause it's going to change, no longer a muad? Because the lender could say to the borrower, you have no ability to make my ox into a muad, because maybe you just didn't watch it properly. Rav Papa says, Midaseifa Rishus Mashana. Rav Papa says from the fact that in the concluding clause, the Rishus, when it changes jurisdiction, it changes its status. We could say Reisha Nami Rishus Mashana. We could say also in the initial clause, the really when it changes Rishus, it changes its status from normally from a muad to a tam. Reisha Hainu tam. So why in the first clause does it not change its status? Mishum the kol makom shaholech shem ba'av. Because in this case, the status of the owner is still going to be upon the ox. The name of the owner is still on the ox, and that's why in this specific case, the reisha is not going to change. That's why it doesn't change its status in the first clause. So then the Mishnah says the shura itztidin that if you have a rodeo ox and the rodeo ox kills somebody, we're not going to be responsible for death for misa. Eno chayav misa. A shura itztidin eno chayav misa. So the Gemara says, what's the reasoning? Hibayu mau lagabe mizbeach. Okay, can you take this shura itztidin? Can you take this ox that's supposed to go on that was a rodeo ox and it killed somebody? Okay, it's not liable for death because it was incited to kill. But question is, can you bring it as a carbon on the altar? Normally speaking, if an ox kills somebody, you can't bring it as a carbon on the altar, because Rashi says "Shegabe nogech beratzon vehemis adam pshito on the apostle." It's obvious to us that such an ox that typically kills is disqualified. Well, what if it killed, but only killed under an ones? It means it was duress. It was not its fault. So Rav says it's kosher. Rav says you can't bring it on the altar. Shmuel says it's possible. Rav says it's kosher anasu, because it did it under duress. Shmuel says it's possible. Shmuel says disqualified because already never do avera, because a sin was done with it. What was the sin that was done with it? The sin that was done with it, it was used in this rodeo, which is obviously something that was which was inappropriate because it caused somebody to die. So the Gemara says outside of Brisa, it says in the pasuk Minabehema, it says about the karbanos Adam ki akriv mikem karban Hashem Minabehema Minabakar Minatzon takrivos karbanchem. When it says from the animal Lahotzi Esaroveya, that's a nirva. That means that an animal that was involved in sexual acts is disqualified from being brought as a carbon. Minabakar Lahotzi Esaneva. You can't bring an animal that was worshipped. Minatzon Lahotzi Esamukta. You can't bring an animal that they designated for a sacrifice. That's how Rashi says it. Minatzon, lahotzi es hanogeach. You can't bring an animal that gored somebody and put him to death. And I'm Rabbi Shimon. So Rabbi Shimon says, im nemar roveya. If he says you can't bring a roveya, lama nemar nogeach. Why do we need to know that you can't bring the nogeach? Im nemar nogeach, lama nemar roveya. If it says a nogeach, why can't you bring the roveah? Because the roveah is something that the nogeach doesn't have. We need to write each one. Roveah, what's the reason why it needs to tell us the roveah? Asaba onas karason, because the roveah, even if it was done under duress, we view it as though it did it willingly, and you can't be brought. Nogeach, but nogeach also about onas karason. But nogeach, if it did it under duress, we don't view it as though it did it willingly. That's obviously the relevant part for our source, for our discussion. But first, we finish nogeach mishalim kofer. The nogeach pays a ransom. Roveah ain't a mishalim as a kofer. But the roveah, you don't pay the ransom penalty. Therefore, it needs to say both the roveah and the roveah and the nogeach. But katani miyas, but it says explicitly in this source, roveah asaba onas karatzon. That the roveah we view, even though it's done under duress, as though it did wrongly. But the nogeach, asaba onas karatzon. But the nogeach, we don't view it that way. So what's the halacha that we don't view the nogeach as though it did it willingly? Isn't it Bava Kamma that even though it killed under duress, therefore it could still be brought as a sacrifice? The Gemara says no, we'll katala. No, means say we don't kill it. That's the halacha. That if it killed only under duress, like in this rodeo, we don't kill it. And hachanam mistabra. That's logical. The amras lekarban. If you want to say it's for a carbon, nogeach asa bo ones karatzon. But because if you want to say it's for a carbon, that in that case we don't do an ogeach as though if it did under duress, as though it did it willingly. It doesn't say anything about an ogeach doing it willingly or unwillingly in the Torah. It must be that it's referring to katoa. It must be if it's referring to katoa. So as the statement, Amar, nogeach masham as a kofer, that if the animal gores, it pays the ransom. Roveya ain't a masham as a kofer. But if the animal is roveya, if it commits a sexual act with a person, then it doesn't pay the ransom. So the Gemara says, what's the scenario that we're talking about? What's the scenario that Rabbi Shimon is referring to? And the Nogeach pays the kofar, whereas the Roveya does not pay the kofar. If you want to talk about a case that as part of the sexual act, the woman dies, and at this, Rabbi Shimon says he doesn't pay the kofar. Mali katala b'karna, mali katala b'reveal. Why do we care how she dies? If the woman died through the goring or through the sexual act of the ox, ela de rava v'lo katla. So if the ox is roveya the woman, but he doesn't kill her, well, that reason why then he doesn't pay the ransom is because she didn't die. The reason why he doesn't pay the ransom then is because he doesn't die. So what's the scenario we're talking about? So the ox was roveya the woman, but she didn't die. But they brought the woman to the court, and there they killed her for having the sexual act with the ox. You might have said command the couple dummy on top of mem aleph and off. You might have said it's as though he killed her, as though the ox killed her. Kamashon, we don't say that. Rabbi says no. The Rabbi v'katla. No, he gored her and he killed her. What do you say? What do we care how she died? If she died through the sexual act with the ox or through the goring? No, it's totally different. Because Karen kavanaso ahazik, by goring, the ox intends to kill her. I kavanaso anasasva. But here, the ox doesn't intend to hurt her. He intends to have benefit from, to have pleasure. But my plea, what's the nature of the argument? But regal shadar salkabetina. If an ox is walking regularly in a courtyard of the nizak and he tramples on a baby. According to Abaye, Mishalim Kofer, according to Abaye, under those circumstances, because Abaye would say that under these circumstances, he's going to pay the ransom. Rav would say he wouldn't pay the ransom here, because here the animal did not the tinok did not die through goring, but through just regular walking. So therefore, that's according to Abaye, you would say that he'd pay the ransom here, because that's like the roveya. But Rav says you wouldn't pay the kofar. Tanya kavasi the Rav, and indeed we have a bride. So like Rav, sure, it's in enochayev misa, it's not liable for death. It's like he's forced. And so therefore we see that this ox that was engaged, that killed somebody, is still kosher to be brought on the altar, because it was forced. It happened against its will. Okay, we'll stop here. God willing, pick this up. God willing, pick this up tomorrow morning, tonight at 8 a.m.